When they say granite stone was shaped with a copper chisel, right? This is what they usually say. I'm a stone carver, that's what I do for a living. So, no, very simply, no, it doesn't work. We'll try to build a pyramid. I studied industries and machining, and I work as a sculptor. We have a mystery. If the ancient Egyptians during the dynastic Egyptian time had these tools, why we can't find it? And this is the official story. And I disagree with not just me, and engineers as well, they disagree with. The only other explanation that there was an ancient advanced civilization before the flood, and that it ended because of the catastrophe, and then people survived for a long time. The technology was lost, and then the civilization was starting to build up again. This priest, I believe, dated back the civilization to around 30,000 years BC. Wake up!
Friends, we are here in Egypt, in Giza, traveling to Mr. Yousef, asking him about ancient Egyptian civilization. Personally, for yourself, what questions about pyramids, about Egyptian culture, you still want to find answers?
I am impassioned with the ancient advanced lost technology and the mystery of the pyramids. The pyramids are like living structures. They are somehow fusing the life forces, the knitters, the forces of nature, the elements. All these elements are mentioned in the ancient Egyptian civilization. They are mentioned in one topic or in one myth. And I don't like the word myth, because for me it's the true information. It's the real knowledge. It's the true science. It's the true physics. Simply the symbol or the shape of a pyramid is mentioned only in one story from the past, which is the story of creation, how life came to be. So all the elements, from the water to the mound to the atom or the shape of the bin, which is the pyramidian shape, is mentioned in them. And many academics now are starting to realize the connection between this ancient story and the pyramid. But the thing that they don't get is they still think it's symbolic. I don't like the word symbolic because it makes me feel somebody doesn't know something and then they just want to say it's symbolic. If I don't know what is the function of this, I would say this is a symbolic ice cream. You know? You know what I mean?
Yes.
You know, use your brain a little bit. If it's something symbolic, I could reduce it to a drawing on the wall. That's why when we study the complexity of design and the challenge of implementation, and then the result and the accuracy, we realize it reflects the capability of the builder. Then compare between what the structure reflected and what the academic studied and the conclusions they came up with. It's not going to be difficult to tell that there is a huge space between those. In my opinion, the true research didn't start yet because the pyramid is a very sophisticated structure. It's very complicated. Almost every aspect of science exists in that structure. In every industry, you have a tolerance You have a range. You want to finish this accurately. But there is no such a thing called 100% accurate. Ask the Germans about it. Ask the Japanese. They will know. Then, when you look at something very simple, if you bring a water scale and you scale, for example, this is something I show to my guests when we go to the Giza Plateau all the time. It's on the cell phone. You have an app that shows like the water scale. Put it on the pyramid stones. Not the outside ones. No, the inner courses. No? The ones that were never meant to be seen. You know, most of them is leveled to 0.2. This is not, this floor that is made with our advanced equipment is not going to give you that level of accuracy. And we have other things. We have the famous box inside the pyramid of Lahoun in Fayoum. The inaccuracy, if we can call it inaccuracy, of flattening and striating the surface of this granite box is 1/1000 of an inch. You know what this means? You know 1 inch?
I guess.
So if you have 1 inch, which is around 2.5 centimeters, for those who don't use inch, try to draw 1,000 line inside 1 inch. You know what this means? Around 400 lines in a centimeter. 40 lines in 1 millimeter. That's exactly it. 40 lines, imagine. Can you draw? The finest pen we had was the 0.5 millimeter that we used to do the technical drawing with, the very sharp. And you can only do 2 of those in a... So imagine that inaccuracy. Like if you look at them, you should go to El Lahoun and see. When you see these results with your own eyes and you see that it exists, it gives you the confidence that you are not following illusion. Go to the Serapeum and ask yourself a question. How did they manage, not to carve the granite, but how did they manage to move into this subterranean structure with 100 tons or 50 tons? That's,
Yes, it sounds so much amazing, and definitely even me being here with my friends just 3 days, you fall in love immediately with this culture, with this place, and you feel like it's a land of secrets you really want to discover.
When my father, God bless his soul, after a lifetime of experience in the field, found or realized some things about the civilization. Most of the time you are not, if you are an academic, you cannot be talking outside the mainstream information. He would have debates with many colleagues of his, and they will tell him about his opinions that like, this is not Egyptology. This is not written in the books. And of course, to be a researcher, you don't have, you can take the basic information in the books, but then you put all that with your experience and start to analyze things so that they won't have a conflict together. This is Egyptology, no, and this is not. So he just put another label so he and the others can study the ancient Egyptian civilization with the possibility of alternative answers for the mysteries.
Thank you. And personally for you, what was the most surprising thing you discovered about Egyptian civilization?
The most interesting thing, I cannot say that I discovered, but I realized it was already there. Because my passion is in industrial and machining and materials and things like that, I realized that there are artifacts exist in the prehistory era, Neolithic burials, and they are reflecting very powerful machining it didn't make sense to me. Basically, it's the subject of the stone vessels, the dishes and the cups and the jars and all these kind of things, because there are two phases in the civilization. One that is pre-Imhotep, before Imhotep. Imhotep is the famous genius engineer and architect from the third dynasty. No, everybody knows about him. But there is another era, the Archaic Age, which basically is the first and the second dynasty. And then the Predynastic time, which is the Neolithic era. And then there is the prehistory. So from prehistory and the Predynastic and Archaic Age, these artifacts were found. And it's displayed in almost every museum. The difference is that the vessels in the prehistory time were created from, according to the official information, all the types of stones that you can find in Egypt. And according to my own research, there is also other types of stones that is abroad, that is brought from abroad. Some of them is coming from Afghanistan, and some of them is coming from Sudan. These materials we must question, because it was found, as I told you, in pre-dynastic time. Pre-dynastic is going with the Neolithic era. So according to the studies, the Neolithic era was a very primitive civilization at the time, and we have many locations of pre-dynastic Neolithic villages like El Amri and the Naqada, Jerza, Marmada, and the others. These are the names of the locations where they found the evidence of this ancient primitive civilization. But in the burials, they found these artifacts. When you realize that these artifacts were made from all the types of stones, hundreds of types, you would question, who established a quarry system? Only answer that you find in the books, that some of these stones can be running in the streams of rivers. What about the ones coming from Afghanistan? I didn't know that there is a river coming from Afghanistan to Egypt. Maybe back in the days, I doubt it. So there had to be a quarry system. And what does it take to establish a quarry system? You must send trained people to search for the qualities they want. And then when they find it, they make camps. And then you need to send supplies from there. So you make roads and then extract, bring the material. And this is all just to bring the material. We didn't talk about manufacturing. So somebody established that in the prehistory. This is the question, one of the questions. Second thing, how did they carve it? You might think there is marks of hammers and chisels. No, there are striations. They look like a lathe. They look exactly like a lathe, and even more powerful than the lathe we have today, because the first few types of rocks I mentioned, they are types called sedimentary and metamorphic stones, and the rest is called plutonic. The plutonic stones and some of the metamorphic stones, they reach 6.5 on the Mohs scale for the solidness of stones and more. So they are very hard. Mohs is the scale for the solidness of stones. And the diamond is the hardest. It's number 10. Quartz is number 7 because it's very hard. So most of the stones that is used in these vessels from the pre-history time, they are from igneous rocks that is 7 on the Mohs scale. The ones that were produced from the third dynasty were only manufactured from one type of stone, and that is white calcite crystal. And it's 3 to 4 on the Mohs scale. So it makes sense that in the third dynasty they produced only from one type of stone. It makes sense. And they have chosen a beautiful type of stone. Calcite is similar to the alabaster we know, but the whiter one. Even that they have chosen the softer one, the result is different than the older ones. So the older ones are much more advanced. What does make this subject very important? That the older ones, the unfinished ones, reflected the shapes of the tools that was used to manufacture it. And some of them have what we know as the tubular drill. The tubular drill is like a pipe, hollow from the inside, and it drills. This is discovered since 1880s by Flinders Petrie. He gathered many of these artifacts and it's displayed in his museum in England. The subject is important here because simply these are the same tool marks that is reflected in the machinery of the pyramids. See, this is why the subject of the vessels is very important. It's like a thread that if you follow it, it leads you to prehistory or pre-dynastic, a very primitive era. In the same era of pre-dynastic, they usually would find in the burials pottery jars. Some of these pottery jars are quite primitive. It is shaped by hand, while the other stone vessels is reflecting something like a leaf. How come? How come you can produce this and your production in pottery is still very primitive? Then the only thing to me that would make sense that these stone vessels were inherited, but from whom? Because supposedly after pre-dynastic it's only prehistory, and then primitive, until God knows. The only other explanation that there was an ancient advanced civilization before the flood and that it ended because of the catastrophe and then people survived for a long time. The technology was lost and then the civilization was starting to build up again. So a long intermediate period. This would be the other possibility.
Thank you. And you mentioned a very interesting idea about degradation of our technologies. Exactly that it could be that they were lost, and also that we even now do not have these knowledges how to repeat, this.
To reproduce?
Yeah.
We'll try to build a pyramid. That's, takes that. When they say granite stone was shaped with a copper chisel, right? This is what they usually say. I'm a stone carver. That's what I do for a living. So, no. Simply, no, it doesn't work. Unless you have a material that is harder than granite, you wouldn't shape it, you wouldn't scratch it. And even the Neolithic limestone that exists here in the pyramid, I will tell you as a stone carver, it would challenge the best iron chisels. So a stone chisel can be more efficient creating shapes. But the tool marks that we find in some of the rocks like basalt and granite and white calcite crystal is not reflecting a chisel mark. It's reflecting a saw mark. And this is how we recognize these tools. How these tools were recognized by the academics is not by finding the tool or finding a scene on the wall that shows the ancient Egyptians during the dynastic time using that tool, but it is the tool mark on the surface of the stone only. Everything else was documented. Shaping statues was documented with a hammer and a chisel, and usually mostly the limestone statues from the Old Kingdom, but I never underestimate the capability of the dynastic Egyptians, especially when you know that this same tool marks do exist on some of the statues. specifically from the Old Kingdom, or the ones that is dated to the Old Kingdom, the diorite gneiss statues of King Khafra, they have tubular drill and saw cutting marks. So the timelines could be much older. So we have a mystery. If the ancient Egyptians during the dynastic Egyptian time had these tools, why we can't find it? Why can't we find it? We found thousands of copper chisels and wooden clams, everything. We found razor blades, we found hoes for farming, we found music instruments from bamboo, survived for thousands of years. Not one tubular drill survived, not one saw that cuts the stone, the saw that cuts the wood. Oh, we found hundreds, if not thousands of those. They are displayed in every museum, in Luxor Museum, in Cairo Museum, everywhere you have these tools. We have the plows for the field, we have everything, but not these tools. So these tools are in the pyramids and also in the vessels that goes back to the pre-dynastic time. We have this Egyptian priest who wrote the history, Manetho or Manethon, who wrote the history during the time of King Ptolemy, and gave details for the civilization. He gave kings lists, he gave timelines, events, sequence, and everything. And this priest, I believe, dated back the civilization to around 30,000 years BC for the civilization. But the British said he was exaggerating. The British, I don't like, I appreciate their studies of all the civilizations and everything, but it's like, this is one Egyptian priest who lived during the dynastic Egyptians, who had access to all the records, because every temple used to have records and stuff. So anyway, they said he was exaggerating, but they made the tests with radiocarbon 14. We know it's not very accurate, but it's a give or take between this and between that. And they made a comparison between the British timeline and radiocarbon dating and the timelines that was given by Manetho. Until 1500 BC, things are really close for all three of them, for Manetho, for the radiocarbon dating, and for the British or the mainstream academic timeline, which is based on British studies. The second one they took was from the Middle Kingdom. And in the Middle Kingdom, according to the mainstream timeline, was around 2100 BC. And Manetho said that it was around 3200 or 3300 BC instead of 2100. So like more than 1000 years different. That's a lot. The results that they found from the radiocarbon dating was much closer to the timeline of Manetho, 3200 BC, than 2100 BC. Then they took another sample from the Archaic Age, the Second Dynasty. According to the mainstream timeline, it's 2800 BC. According to Manetho, it's not 2,800, it's 5,600. See, when you go further in time, it's actually also the gap becomes bigger. And when they took the samples, organic samples it has to be, from the Archaic Age, from the Second Dynasty, and they analyzed it with the radiocarbon 14, it also gave the result that is closer to 5,600 BC. So before 1,500, the radiocarbon dating actually came on the side of the ancient Egyptian priests. So if he's right, then the civilization will be as old as 30,000 years. And this 30,000 years might be the end of the advanced civilization. Not the beginning, the peak, maybe.
Mr. Yousef, I really wanted to ask you, and not only me, but the whole team, we wanted to ask you about your opinion on the connection of pyramids in Giza and Sphinx.
Yeah, Sphinx. Sphinx enclosure and the Sphinx itself is one of the oldest mysteries, and it has a history. It has a long history with treasure hunters and explorers, and you find some really interesting stories around it. As I was mentioning, the work of Dr. Robert Schoch, who was introduced to the field by, God bless his soul, John Anthony West, one of the worldwide famous explorers, who was aware of the work of Schwaller about the erosion around the Sphinx enclosure. And Dr. Robert Schoch, as academic, when he gives his word, it will be heard among academics, because they all support like any information that is based on academic research. So Dr. Robert Schoch did his work around there, and did also a GPR test. First, the water erosion is so obvious, as you would say, around the area, around the Sphinx enclosure. There are two types of erosion. One that is affecting the sediments, it's a horizontal erosion, and this is the one that is caused by wind and sand affecting the weak sediments of the limestone. We have grooves like that. The other one is vertical, like this. And they are natural cracks that exist in the bedrock, and these natural cracks became wider from the effect of rain beating them. That erosion is the important one, these fissures, as he would call it, and that's because it proves that the Sphinx and the Sphinx enclosure existed during a geologic era where the rain this era was famous for this heavy rain. And according to his studies, this era ended around 9,700 BC. So very close to the 12,000 BC. That's when it ended. So it had to be older. So if this academic information is accurate, and I believe it is, then the Sphinx and the Sphinx enclosure cannot be less than 11,700, but more, because that's when that rain that caused that erosion ended. So it can only be older than 11,700 BC. Then about the search for the Hall of Records, which is supposedly underneath the Sphinx. He did also a GPR test, and it's like a sonar test for the ground. The result, as he told us in his lectures, showed that there is a tunnel running underneath the paw of the Sphinx, but the academic who was responsible at the time didn't agree, and he said this is nothing but natural crack in the bedrock. Why? I don't know. Even that we see there are two rooms on the sides of the Sphinx, nobody talks about those. It's like, why nobody talks about the two rooms on the side of the Sphinx from both sides? Nobody talks about it. They just see the two empty rooms. Why is it not in a technical drawing or any drawings or any plan for the Sphinx? I don't know. In the Middle Ages, a story was passed down, and it's written in the official books, that Napoleon Bonaparte, his soldiers reached, back then the Sphinx was bad until the neck, and that his soldiers reached the gate between the paws of the Sphinx. And for some reason, they had to stop. But the locals said that they saw this door that leads to the belly of the Sphinx or the inside of the Sphinx. Some of them even said that that tunnel led all the way to the middle pyramid. The academics say that this is exaggeration, but they say this is probably exaggeration. We don't know for sure. Why? The archaeology work that was made by the Egyptian archaeologist Professor Salim Hassan, he found many stelas, which they are pieces of stones, were given to the Sphinx as offerings, and all of them they are showing that the Sphinx is on a pedestal, and the pedestal has a door. The Sphinx is seated on the bedrock. Then the possibility is that the pedestal has a part that is located on the northern structure, the one that is known as the Sphinx Temple, not the Valley Temple, because the Valley Temple belongs to the complex of the Middle Pyramid. But the Sphinx Temple is almost identical to the Valley Temple, but it's right in front of the Sphinx. And the erosion in the stones, in the Middle Pyramid, and in the Sphinx Temple looks like it could be tens of thousands of years. That's also geological.
And what about cosmic phenomena and cosmic objects that are associated to be connected with Sphinx and pyramids? Do you know anything about that, and what's your opinion?
The several names that the Sphinx had talks about its history. One of the oldest names is called Ruti, and Ruti means the two lines. It doesn't mean there are two sphinxes, in my opinion, but it could mean yes, because its alignment with the Leo constellation. One of the other names for the sphinx called Perhul means the house of the lion, and its connection with the Leo constellation. And when the sun rises from Leo, it is the time of the flood. So astronomy is not separate from the cycle on Earth. So the ancients amazingly had a way of being tuned in with the cycles, the small and the bigger and the bigger and the bigger, because they all are cycling with harmony with each other. But we lost how to be tuned in to the cycle. And in my opinion, this is why we are far away now from knowing. We study, like, look at all the mathematics studies around the pyramid. I don't think the engineer kept putting in mind how he can put all those together so they can give these results. For example, the circumference of the so-called King's Chamber divided on the height is equal to 3.1416. And in the books itself, its circumference divided on the height is 3.1416. This cannot be a coincidence. And all this mathematics cannot, in my opinion, doesn't have to be planned, but it's the way they are building the structure with the awareness and the knowing of Mother Nature will give you results with all the golden ratios. You know what I mean? It's like, I will give you a very simple example. It's like when you do seismics to water, the patterns that it takes, you didn't plan, but you simply tuned in the right vibration, or let's say the other one that many people I'm sure have seen online, the sheet of copper and the sand, and then the sound, and then it will give patterns. Nobody designed these patterns, or like, but just doing something that is tuned in with nature will give you this kind of results that is blending with the cycles. Also, the word Sphinx itself, that's supposedly taken from Herodotus, it's not. And it is an ancient Egyptian word called Yousef Awyan. Can you say it?
Yousef Awyan?
Yes. And then the Greeks would usually add the S in the end because Isit was Isis. Hur became Horus. Uzir became Osiris. Nebhet became Nephthys, and so on. So can you say Yousef Awyan and then add an S in the end?
Yousef Awyan?
Yes, exactly. And this is where Sphinx became Sphinx.
Okay.
Yeah. And it means the living statue. And one of the other names is called Hur Akhir. Hur is Horus. M is in. Akhit is the horizon. And there are different ways to understand. So where did the word Hir come from? It came from that famous sign, the face. And it means direction. It means alignment. You are facing where the sun is rising from. Yeah, facing the one facing the horizon. So that's Hurim Akhit, with not Horus in the horizon, in my opinion, but the alignment with the horizon. And with all these things and with all these studies, the official story is talking about something totally different. They say that this was a quarry and a big piece of stone remained in the middle of the quarry. So instead of taking the hard work, removing it, they only carved it as a statue. But nobody knows. This is a made-up story that nobody has any roots for it. But we have things that goes against it, because the stones that were extracted from around the Sphinx was used to build the temple front of it. And this is according to the geologic studies. They knew that this piece exactly came from here. It's the same in density, it's the same geologic order, and all these things. So the idea that the Sphinx was a piece of stone, random piece of stone, and they thought of just shaping it into something instead of removing it, I think it's not.
Thank you so much for your opinions, for your answers, and I really do hope that one day we have all these puzzles together and we discover the truth about all these pyramids and Sphinx and all the English, made this maybe wrong translation, maybe ancient Egypt's also added up something, and you. Step by step, you will go to the really true answer.
Yes.
And
there are new generations now in archaeology and Egyptology that is in a really, really very good level of knowing specifically the ancient Egyptian language. And the difference is the mindset and culture here in Egypt is still close to the ancient Egyptian one thousands of years ago. So when we study the language and translate it, it will be closer to us. We can understand it better because the culture actually still alive in the Egyptians.
Inshallah.
Inshallah,
yeah?
Yes.
And Mr. Yousef, could you also please share your opinion on society you and your family and your friends are happy? What society it should be? What, in your opinion, is creative society instead of consumer society we have now?
Here is the point. Yeah. We are far away from being happy. And maybe we lost the true meaning of being happy. What makes you happy? Have lots of money? What's a treasure to you?
Inner state. Maybe inner state of love and joy. Maybe safety.
I believe truth is happiness. If you can truthfully, actually, if we look at the truth, it's not going to be happiness. It's going to be sadness for everything that humanity turned it into. Worse than slaves we are. We are worse than slaves. Who is benefiting from this? Where is freedom? What is freedom? Do we really know what freedom is? And why do we look for freedom? Because we don't have it. Why do we look for happiness? Because we don't have it. Who is the reason behind that? Is it nature? Will we be allowed to live by the nature, by the law of nature? And who has the right to allow and not? And who gave them this right? And is it right or is it forced on us? That's...
Yeah, I see what you mean right now. It's you just described consumer society we are living in. But could you just imagine the world you would love to live in? And just in few sentences, what would be the world you wake up in the morning and you are happy in this world?
Yeah, that's more like I can answer this one. Just give me a sec. The world that I would wake up to and be happy is almost impossible to exist. I thought of it and I lost hope of having it existing, because it's a world without war, without tanks and rocket launchers and missiles, and this is a waste. This is fear. Fear was always the key to control the masses. And you know that one aircraft can cost $1.7 trillion, just one. Imagine how much resources is wasted all over the arms of
to make this world happen, the world you just described, without war, without fear, what actually can each of us, of human beings, do in order to make it real?
First, we must prosper. And all the resources is taken for war. So if the humans, all the human race, can decide to give up building armies, we will have all the prosperity in the world. We will have more than we need. More. Imagine the budgets that is spent on the militaries around the world. If it's directed to the true benefit of mankind, good homes, good fields, purified water, solar energy, or clean types, implosion, instead of implosion, instead of combustion or explosion energy, we look for implosion or, electromagnetism, any other studies like scientifically, anything anything that they can find inside, they want to turn it into a weapon, basically. So that's one hand, so we can reach them, and then give the mothers their true position in nature, the respect they deserve, and with that, they can raise the new generations, knowing that they are the leaders of the society. And this is nature. That doesn't mean that man is not going to be, no, but I'm talking about the first 7 years for the child with his mother. He's like a shadow to his mother. And this time he is being fed from his mother. So, and we have a famous saying: if you prepare the mother, you prepare the society. It's not difficult. It's very simple because it's nature. Yeah.
Thank you for your answers. And inshallah, we have this world that you just described. I'm sure that each person would love to live in safe and prosper world. And as you just mentioned, that to have this society like in some time in the future, we need to act now. Yes, we need to question ourselves in what's going on in the world.
We act yesterday.
Exactly.
But do you think there is hope to do this?
You know, I'm sure that if we are sitting here and talking about it, and 1,000 people around the world are doing the same, we will do it.
Yes.
And also me and the whole team, we want to thank you. It's a big honor for us that you are having us in your show.
Thank you for having me. I hope that I shared with you something useful about the ancient Egyptian civilization. And
yeah, as you said,
really admiring what you're doing and knowing that all this is just from people to people.
Absolutely.
Has nothing to do with governments, has nothing to do with political agendas or misinformation or something like that. This is really something nice, and I think anybody who can participate with you should do it and try to bring the people.
The conversation is very heartwarming, and as you said, memory card is not enough to touch all the subjects.
Yes.
And Mr. Yousef, could you please just in the camera say something to our viewers, to anyone who will watch this video, who will get interested, who will be also touched? Anything you want to say to anyone? Like a message to society.
A message to society?
Yes. To anyone who wants to become a better human being and who wants to live in a better world.
Yeah. There's only one message that I can think of. Wake up!